Hello everyone, welcome to Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. I'm Christina Joy, the events coordinator. Sankofa has been open since 1997. We were founded by Shirikiana and Haile Garima, two filmmakers that made Sankofa the movie that came out in 1993. You can watch it on Netflix right now. Okay. Tonight we have a very special guest, Ms. Iya Jennifer, the integrative school psychologist. Iya Jennifer is the founder, lead cultivator. She is the founder and lead cultivator of ReGeneration180, the organization to bring forth the national Calabash of Alkebulan studies. They are a national organization that exists to teach African children how to think for themselves, speak for themselves, and act in their own best interests, as well as the interests of our people worldwide. Their mission is to restore natural light, regenerate natural genius within every child of African descent. Give it up for Iya Jennifer. And without further ado, I will give Iya the floor.
Thank you so much, Christina Joy. Thank you all for showing up today. I appreciate it. I overheard that some of you are studying to be educators, so that's a good thing. So, but I appreciate you all coming out. Those of you who have come out again because the first one was canceled this summer, I appreciate you returning. So we're going to get right into it because I have a lot of information to share. And so before I start the bulk of the presentation, I want to go quickly over 4 major points that I hope that you take away from today. You're going to get a lot of information, like I said, but here are the takeaway points. So the first point that I want to make sure that you take away is that my critique of the special education system or the education system in general is from my experience, okay? So from my experience and my story, from my experience, my personal experience, and my studies as an African-centered psychologist, sorry about that. So I believe, and many other African-centered educators would probably agree, that special education in America is frequently used as a way to is used as a way to perpetuate racial and social disparities. And so if you are studying at Howard, I'm sure that they have included you in that already. Point number 2 is that I believe that a customized curriculum framework, new teaching methods, and also a different educational trajectory would absolutely reflect the diverse needs of African students, as well as any other students who is non-white, in terms of their own culture, or as it pertains to their own culture. Next slide. The third point that I want you to take away is that frequently lowered academic, social, and societal expectations of Black students are a problem in the world of special education, and that also contributes to a cycle of failure and restricted opportunities. I'm sure that you all have heard of the school to prison pipeline around, the realm of that area. And the last takeaway that I'd like you to take with you is that empowering African children is the foundation of what education of the 21st century should be, okay? And so let's go on to the next slide. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me, what I do. We're also gonna talk about the historical context of education in general. We'll also touch on the historical context of special education. After that, we'll talk about African-centered education and psychology, theory and practice. We will then go into reframing our thoughts of the goals of education. And I'm going to let Dr. Amos Wilson, who is my teacher, in a way, I'm going to let him take care of that because I have a couple of clips that will summarize those points. And I'll share with you a little bit about the book that I brought with me, African-Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order, which is from Dr. Amos Wilson. So, all right, so a little bit about me. I am the integrative school psychologist. I call myself that because I use what is known as conventional methods, but also traditional methods in order to treat children. So I have my own private practice. I left BCPS in 2017 to start my own private practice, but also to start school. And since then, the idea of starting a school has now developed into creating a school system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that more towards the end. But I have over 20 years of experience in education as a teacher, as a school psychologist, as an administrator, and of course now as the administrator of my own school. I am a EFA practitioner and Orisha priestess. The Iya and Iya Jennifer means mother. I am a priestess of Okuzuaye. And so that also incorporates, I also incorporate that into my work. And of course, I am the founder and the director of ReGeneration180, and I will, of course, share a little bit more about that. All right, so the history of ReGeneration180, I actually started ReGeneration180 on paper back in 2014. And so again, like I said, in 2017, that's when I began to actually actively work on the project or the organization. We offer community schooling, which is basically homeschoolers on paper learning together in a community type setting. We offer our services and knowledge to K through 12. So the community school basically means that they learn together. We have not had K through 12 yet, but we do accept K through 12. We do homeschool groups, Rite the Passage for females, youth leadership program, parental education, and we do all of this while gaining research. So we want to be able to contribute to the body of knowledge that is the research in order to further help our children. All right. Okay, so I find the history of education very fascinating. I hope that you do too. But I'm going to go through it. I'm going to try to go through it as quickly as I can in order to make sure that I save some time for any questions or comments that you would like to ask. So let's go ahead and start with the historical background of education in America. Okay. So if you are a history buff or conspiracy theorist or anything, somebody who likes to actually learn about things that affect African American people in terms of the history of America, you may know that the current system is a copy of the Prussian system long ago. So several years, well, a battle between France and Prussia took place many years ago. And actually Prussia is now unified Germany. So when you think of Prussia, think of German education. But the Prussian army, they won the battle because they had such a vigorous and rigorous education system put in place. And what really happened was they trained their soldiers in a specific way. They loved how they did that. And then they implemented that into a school system for their children. So that was the invention of the common schools in Germany. And so one of our educators, you may know this name, Horace Mann, if you are a educator, if you want to learn about it. We even have a Horace Mann elementary, I believe, in DC. So he is a big name in education. He was actually the first Secretary of Education in the state of Massachusetts. So he was a really big deal. So what he did was he studied what they did in Prussia, he loved it, and he came back home to the government and said, look, I want to implement this, okay? This could be a great way for us to make sure that everyone are able, or is able to do the following things that I want to show you in the next slide. Okay, so this was his vision, okay? These words here, okay, are what he had in mind for an educational system. And with the help of, we've got Sigmund Freud down here, you may know his name, very notable figure in Western psychology, although he did and is still, his work is still criticized a bit because of number one, his controversial, thoughts about sexuality and children, but then also a lot of his work did lack empirical evidence. So, but I say this is Horace Mann and Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud's uncle or uncle cousin or some document as his uncle, some document as his cousin, but Edward Bernays is the father of propaganda. So these three figures, they didn't necessarily work together, but they were all working at the same time that the system was being developed. This guy over here, Alfred Bernays, he is the psychologist who developed the first psychological test for children. So keep those people in mind as you look at these words, okay? They all had a common goal, they all had common interests in this type of system being rolled out. All right. Okay, so fast forward to Reconstruction, okay? The African people were free, and so, we have to send them somewhere. So in order for us to gather and group folks and make sure that everyone stays compliant and, knows how to take orders and things like that, the Black children joined the system, okay? And so, of course, if you know your history about Reconstruction, you know that the Freedmen's Bureau had a lot to do with rolling out education for African children in America. The only expectation for these African children were that they just become good citizens. So it wasn't as rigorous as the education for their white counterparts, but nonetheless, they had a couple of different resources, but not as many resources as the other children in the United States. I do want to also say that you probably heard Carnegie Woodson's perspective on the Freedmen's Bureau. He talks about it in The Miseducation of the Negro. If you've read that book before. So he was in support of the Freedmen's Bureau, but that support kind of waned off after he saw mismanagement of money, and also the organizational leadership was kind of whacked. So, with that being also said, there are a couple of other names that also disapproved of how the Freedmen's Bureau was operating. And so Booker T. Washington, he believed that education provided by the Freedmen's Bureau did not properly prepare African American children to use practical skills and to develop economic self-reliance. Okay, those were two of his major things that he'd seen that was wrong with the system. Also Anna J. Cooper, she was an influential educator of the 20th century. She believed that the education that was being provided was very superficial, and that they were not asking much of African American students or challenging them enough. And then also Frederick Douglass, who was, again, he was also initially supportive, but then became critical because of leadership concerns. All right. Okay, so this is a lot of history, y'all, so just hang on with. All right, so money is talking now. All right. So now we're entering into the 20th century. You probably don't really recognize the faces from that far away, but we have Vanderbilt, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and Rockefeller. Okay? This was right before the Depression. These gentlemen had now gained a monopoly on their given areas of work, and so we're going to focus on Rockefeller. Okay, we are going to focus on him, the oil tycoon. But these plutocrats, and a plutocrat is a person who is extremely wealthy and exerts significant influence and control over the country's economic and political system due to their wealth. We have a couple that have been added now. I would name their names, but Bill Gates and George Soros and there's a couple of more, Elon Musk. So these people were very influential in creating what we see today, the type of education that we see today. So before, it was in the government's hand, and now the government has now kind of shared the space and say, okay, what's your money talking about, all right? And so these folks were able to influence how the policies and procedures of education. All right, next slide. Okay. I think you're going backwards. All right, cool. Okay, so in as it pertains to special education, we have Carnegie and we have Rockefeller. All right, they were the two most influential in shaping what we know today as special education in America. All right, they had well, first of all, Rockefeller had created the first board of education called the General Education Board, which had nothing to do with the government, but it was its own separate organization. If you see, I don't know, you've probably seen this quote before, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. That is a direct quote from John D. Rockefeller. And so they used their money to, complete their vision of an ideal society as it pertains to their own self-interest. What they did was they gave this man here in the corner, Lewis Terman, who was a psychologist and academic, and I have to also add that he was a proponent for eugenics. A lot of them were, okay. But they gave him the funding in order for him to change and standardize the test that Alfred Bernay, which I showed you in a couple of slides back, to change that test in order to standardize. That means standardize means that making sure that there's one goal that we want to hit. If somebody doesn't hit that goal, there's something wrong with them. Okay, so standardize means just to make a standard, make a standard of what they're actually trying to look for in terms of intellectual capacity or educational capacity. So they wanted to make sure to weed out those who could not do. Okay. All right, so now we're skipping down to kind of like the 70s here. We are now, a lot of things had happened between then and now, but we're gonna skip ahead because we're gonna focus just on special education. In 1975, the first special education law was put into place, which was called the Handicapped Children Act, okay? It was signed by Gerald Ford. Later on in 1990, we have George H.W. Bush, who expanded the types of services and expanded the coverage for what was included in special needs, okay? And then lastly, we have his son, who introduced some significant changes, including making sure that intervention services were available for younger children, but then also that these children in the special education classes had highly qualified teachers, and also, more access to different curriculum for children with disabilities. All right, so modern day issues. All right, so when I say modern day, I don't want to think that this is just now happening. All right, these are, I did mention Amos Wilson earlier. If you have not read any Amos Wilson books, you need to grab one. Just anyone, just start anywhere, okay? But these are things, the things that I talk about, day to day are things that he was talking about when I was 11 years old, okay? So these issues have been issues. Some things have improved somewhat, but when I think about true change, I think about changing the foundation. We have to get to the root of the problem, because if we're just kind of, slapping on Band-Aids, that's all it is. It's just slapping on a Band-Aid, slap a Band-Aid on the problem. So let's talk about some modern day issues here. All right, so this graph here, this pie graph here is all children. Okay, I don't want you to think that it's just African American children, but if you look at the pie chart, we have 40% of students who are in special education have been identified as a student with a specific learning disability. That means dyslexia, dysgraphia, a specific learning disorder. We have 18% who are speech or language impaired. And we'll talk about how students are classified, or how these disabilities are discovered. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Other health impairments, that usually means ADHD and other things. Other health impairment means that there's something that's impairing their health, and it's a very general category. Autism, 7.6%. Intellectual disabilities, that is the classification that children who are mentally retarded, is also kind of an exchange term for that condition. Emotional disturbance, we're going to talk about that later too. Emotional disturbance is emotional disturbance. Kids who have bipolar, or who have extreme behavior issues that impact their learning, okay? And then other disabilities like blindness and deaf, that is the 7.3%. So those are the main disability categories that we usually see when we are testing students, or the categories that we place them in. Okay, well, I'm gonna say we, if I don't do that anymore. All right, so I have highlighted here in red the classifications that we see most of our African American children in. We have multiple disabilities. Well, I'm going to go back to multiple in a second. Specific learning disabilities, like I said, other health impairment, specifically ADHD, emotional disturbance, and multiple disabilities means that there's either two or more of these, anything here, two or more. So multiple disabilities means that they fit one category and then they fit another. All right. Get back to my notes over here. All right, next slide. Okay, so um, okay, so research has shown that Black children are often overrepresented in certain disability classifications, like I said, and they are disproportionately represented with the label ED, or emotional disturbance, and more so than their white counterparts. Let's go to the next one. All right. So I want to share a little bit of research, current research with you before we continue on. I do want to say that the criteria for determining classifications varies from state to state. There is no across the board way to determine. We have states like DC, we use the discrepancy model first and foremost. That means that there is a large gap or a significant gap between a child's educational performance and how they perform on an IQ test, okay? Here in DC, or at least when I was working for DCPS, they were trying to incorporate something called response to intervention, which is RCI. So in contrast, states like Florida, their primary way to determine a disability is by using RCI. RCI, or response to intervention, is basically seeing after a problem is identified, they give the student a round of interventions, mostly three rounds of interventions to see if those things help the issue, okay? And take a sip of water here. At a point, at a particular point in time, I think the push was to do RTI across the board, or at least have most states wanted to at least try RTI because it makes sense in order to try to correct the problem. We don't want to just kind of shove them into special education. We want to see if we can help them in the general education classroom before we do something, which was what is called the least restrictive environment, which would be in the special education classroom. So trying to help students before they get to the point where they need to be separated and in these smaller groups, that's kind of the goal, I think, that most states are trying to achieve. So a recent study, and this was in 2017, a recent study wanted to determine, or they sought to figure out if labels used in special education accurately describe the needs of Black learners. They looked at how well Black children with labels of learning disabled and intellectually disabled, how they were doing compared to their peers. They used a big data set. That represented students with disabilities across the entire country. The study found that there were major differences in how these children were doing in their school based on their diagnosis. But they also found that Black students were not doing as well as they should be, even when they had the same diagnosis as other students. So one that, first of all, that speaks to the types of resources that are provided for our children, but it also just speaks to the differing ways that we determine these disabilities. If there's no consistency in that, it makes it very difficult for a child, if I move my child to a different state, and they were doing perfectly well in special education here, they might do dramatically different in a different state. That's a concern, okay? That is a concern. The National Education Association, key takeaways from them, and I think this article is a screenshot from an article, I think it was in 2019. They also conclude many of the same things that we're talking about here. So the National Education Association and other organizations, they know that this is a problem. And so, of course, there is research being done by scholars to try to correct the problems, but we still are a long way off. All right, let's keep going here. All right, so now let's talk about what we came here to talk about is the African-centered perspective on special education. So I want to say first that there is no, well, first of all, let me just define African-centered education. African-centered education is the placement of indigenous African theoretical and philosophical ideas at the center of education. It is the utilization of commonalities amongst traditional African cultures to serve as the basis of unity and progress. Okay? There is no standard practice of African-centered education. All right, although most African-centered programs do have some of the same main elements, which I will get into the next slide. There is a growing number of African-centered schools that exist across the country. Most of them accept children who have been labeled as these different learning disabilities, they are all inclusive, most of them. And especially since the pandemic, I have seen that there has been a rise of African-centered schools being open. So, and the last point is that, just a little side note, ReGeneration180 is currently in the process of establishing a nationwide school system called the National Calabash of Alkebulan Studies. Alkebulan is the old word for Africa. So if you have not heard or seen that word, Alkebulan is the original name for Africa. All right. Okay, so some common elements of African-centered education or African-centered schools. Cultural relevance, of course, historical consciousness, self-empowerment, holistic development, deep community and family engagement, critical thinking and transformation, Pan-Africanism and a global perspective, resistance to Eurocentrism, and cultural competence, identity, and self-actualization. So, not, like I said, not all African-centered schools are equal. They do not all, and I think that's one of the reasons why developing a system is so important, because there are many things that we as African people need to take in our own hands, not for any other reason but to empower ourselves. And so doing this type of thing is leading to that type of empowerment. All right, it's a lot going on here, but I'm going to kind of summarize here. So this is ReGeneration180's educational philosophy, okay? And what I will say is that, every school, of course, follows their own educational philosophy. I think what is different about ReGeneration180 in particular is that we are educating children to create industries, okay? We are educating children to create industries. I think that the trajectory of Black education is just as important to change and alter, as well as just the actual content that they're learning. not everything has to change, but I feel that there are a lot of things that children go to school for that aren't really applicable to what they actually need to learn. So I think what makes us different is that we are not necessarily college prep, okay? Now, I want to say or emphasize that I'm not against going to college. However, I do feel that there is a need for children to, first of all, learn how to work with each other. Okay, so that's the whole concept behind the community schooling. But then also employ each other. Okay, and so learning how to build a business and keeping yourself in business and employing your brothers and sisters and other people, is important. Okay, Amos Wilson talks a lot about building industries. Okay, there are industries that already exist that we kind of fight for jobs. We'll fight for jobs to enter those industries, and those industries are important. Okay, they do need to continue, but there are also ways for us to kind of empower ourselves as a group, and so that is one of the things that's different about the system that we're creating. All right, so our system, our four key aims of our curriculum framework is that we want to produce good citizens of the collective. Okay? And we also would like to restore healthy relationships amongst African people, but of course restoring healthy relationships with other cultures as well. So we need to start with ourselves first. Cultivating a creative and productive type of individual. That goes back to creating industries and also employing each other. And our last key aim is to produce responsible socio-economical advantaged members of a society. There's a long way to go with that. There are a lot of elements that are within each of these key aims, kind of little check boxes of things that we are doing in order to make this happen, but those are the key aims of our framework. All right, so before we go on, I just want to stress once again that there is no particular way to do African-centered education, but those elements are usually a part of the program. Now, I do want to say that when I talked about the way that children are identified for special education, the types of methods, and kind of varying from state to state, that is one of the main gripes, I would say, in terms of an African-centered educator has with the special education system. But then also just being labeled, period. So these labels have done a lot to, especially our Black boys, they have done a lot to kind of diminish their light. And so, like I said, or like Christina Joy has shared, one of my vision, one of the points of my vision is that we do restore that light in our children. And so, no matter what their supposed abilities are, I think that I didn't really go into it before on the slide before, but the way that first of all, the intelligence tests that are most commonly used have been found to be quite biased. Okay, the type of questions that are being asked, in the way they're asking them, there's been a lot of research that has shown that that is not part of the knowledge of a certain type of student. So if you test this child in an urban community, they may not know. There's pictures that have been shown that are shown to them on the tests and types of terminology, And they might not know what those words are. They may not have seen what that thing is that you're showing me. I don't know what that is. So there's a lot of that that continues to go on, even though many of these tests are like in their sixth, seventh edition, well, the fourth, fifth edition. But we're still trying to find a way to test a group of students from varying cultures. And I've actually seen the same thing with students from Hispanic background. They also have trouble with these types of things as well. So standardizing a test for many different types of children has gotten us into some mess, okay? We have a lot of students who have been identified as something that it's probably not. It's probably only because they didn't understand something. And so, these are some of the main points as to the problems of special education in terms of an African-centered perspective. So I'm going to, the next 3 slides are of Amos Wilson. Okay, again, he is my spiritual godfather, all right? A lot of what he has taught and has written about is being played out in what I'm doing here. And so I want you to listen to the next 3 clips. I think that they're gonna go pretty fast. But he will kind of help you to understand what I'm trying to ask you in terms of reframing your thoughts about the goals of education, about special education, and about the outcome of education, or the projected outcome of education. So let's start with the first one.
The application of certain rules and definitions to others influence how they are related to. When you put a label on somebody, you are also defining how other people, how that somebody is going to be related to by others. It's not a mere label. It is a prescription for relationships, how other people will relate to this individual. It is also a prescription for how this person will be perceived by others and how they relate to themselves and perceive themselves. In other words, then the labeling of people affects their perception of themselves and of the world. And by being labeled, then their vision is transformed, and to a degree so is their psychology, and so is their relationship with other people. Thus, due to power differentials, the processes of labeling behavior are tantamount to the processes of creation. What am I saying here? The processes of letting Europeans label our behavior and apply their rules and definitions to our behavior is not a mere stigmatizing of our behavior, but it is tantamount to their creating our behavior. For today, ladies and gentlemen, we are a created people. We have been created by the European power system. We have yet to become self-creating. And we will become self-creating when we become self-labeling. And we become labelers of the world ourselves. When we measure our children and relate to them in terms of our measurement, not in terms of other people's measurement of them. Labeling and the prescriptions it implies may therefore become a part of the problem it is designed to solve. You thought it was going to solve your child's problem when they were taking the special ed? No. It becomes a part of the problem itself. It helps to maintain the problem. It is there to maintain the problem.
Okay, now I want to talk about this a little bit. And I want to back up a little bit because Rockefeller, if you remember the slide on Rockefeller, who had a very big investment on education in general, he also, with the kind of monopolizing the oil industry, He also built relationships with what is now known as the pharmaceutical industry as well. And so that was kind of going on too at the same time. So there is a deep relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and the educational industry. And so if you kind of think about that in terms of children who are in special education, who are medicated, there is an advantage for children to be medicated. And specifically here, he's talking about labeling behavior. He's talking about those who are labeled as emotionally disturbed. So it's a really, and I'm speaking now from experience, when there are behaviors in the classroom that are impeding a child's learning, it's a little bit difficult to kind of measure or to understand what's going on if you are not really clued in. For example, one school psychologist could do observations and test the child and do interviews with the parent and the student and the teachers and all that, and they might come to the conclusion that the child has an emotional disturbance. However, what is not included in emotional disturbance is things that are temporary or impactful in a different way, like trauma or depression or things like that. So what you might see as being emotionally disturbed, I might see that if the child is depressed and we need to, give the child some counseling in the school, but that doesn't mean that they have to be, but that does not mean that they have to have an IEP. Okay, so one person's perspective differs from another. It just depends on who's testing your child, really. It really does. And how deep they dig, how much they attribute to, something that may be temporary. Yeah, so it's a tricky thing. However, school psychologists are gatekeepers to special education. So we kind of have the last word, and that's a lot of power for one person. Okay. All right, next clip.
The main purpose of education is not preparing black children for jobs. It is not preparing them to work for white folk. That is not the main purpose of the education of our children or our people. For if that is our main purpose, then it means another constant has remained in the world, and that's the constant of slavery under a different name. Now it's called looking for a job, with the same people having the job and the same people determining our wages. If you're talking about true change in the world, then you must educate yourself to create your own jobs and to employ yourself.
Okay, so here is another fact. And I do want to say that this slavery of a different name does not just pertain to us. This is that was what Rockefeller and Carnegie, that's what they were looking for. So now this is all across the board. Well, not now. It has never been designed for us, number one. However, the system is creating slaves in a way of all of us, white, black, and everything in between. And so just specifically speaking about African children and those in special education, you know, going to work for a person who is, well, going to work for people should not be the goal of education. Number one, the goal of education should be to solve problems, okay? And so if we are going to, if we are sending our children to school to solve problems, first of all, we're thinking about other people's problems because the plutocrats will always be in charge of what's going on, what they identify as a problem, what Musk and Gates and all those folks, what they identify as problems, that's what the school system will reflect. So, and I'm talking again across the board, so this is not just a reality for African American children, but the reality of the school system overall for all children. Okay, so we have one. I think we're good.
I told my class the other day, wouldn't it really be so different if you came to this class out of a desire to learn? You know, just out of the pure desire to learn, and that we didn't relate to each other as student and teacher, but as people sharing knowledge and information. And that I don't have to take the role of an authority over you. And that I don't have to motivate your education through fear. So that you do what you are asked to do because you're afraid of getting an F, or because you want to get an A, or because you want to be great one day, or because you want status and all of these other things. Can't you see then at the very center of your education is an education based on fear and false pride and false motivations, so that when you get through, you will be a twisted human being, and therefore you will interject that kind of value upon the population as a whole? People who are educated without spirit, without a reference for life, are educated to become prostitutes. They then will sell their services to the highest bidders, regardless of how what they will do will be used. So consequently, then, the African education is one that must be fundamentally redirected. I don't think we gain a great deal if we are narrow in looking at African education and Egyptian education. If we assume that all we have to do is just reimpose it upon ourselves, because we have to face the reality. We do live in a different historical time and a different political, social, contextual time. And that, of course, has to be considered when we look at education. We have to recognize that the Egyptian was educated within a nation, within an empire. And of course, it means then that even when the Egyptian was educated in a very practical sense of saying, okay, you get educated this way, you will become a scribe, and you will become respected by men, and so forth and so on. You will make big money, and this and so forth. You have to recognize that we can't quite motivate our own children in this light. You see, the most practical motivation in education is this: go to school so you can get a job. Go to school so you can be employed and gain status and so forth. But you must recognize when you own your own nation, this is compatible with advancing the interests of that nation. But when you are in the midst of another nation, and when you are a dominated people, to advise and motivate your children on that basis means that they have a narrow concept of education, and in following through their professions, they will support directly and indirectly the very system which dominates them. So, so, so we have to recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that it is not enough just to educate our children in reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I think even those of us who call ourselves Afrocentric have forgotten about that. We think that it is enough merely to train our children in Afrocentric thoughts and orientations. However, to train them in Afrocentric thought and orientation in mathematics and science without also preparing a nation for them is filled with problems. And often it means then that you will educate maybe a very brilliant mathematician who has Afrocentric ideas, but who in the end still must work for IBM and AT&T and the rest. and he'll find himself frustrated and upset, but in order to earn his bread, he's got to work for the enemy. So consequently, then, a part of education, ladies and gentlemen, is the building of a nation and the building of institutions so that we can hire those ones we educate. So that in working to fulfill their own needs and desires, even though those needs may be somewhat selfish, they are still working to advance the interests of the nation. You can educate your children into scientific thinking and mathematical thinking all you wish. Unless you have an economy, it will come to nothing. Because today, ladies and gentlemen, doing an advanced project in research project in physics costs millions and millions of dollars.
All right, so this is a little dated. I think this is in 1994, hence the idea. But it's the same, type of issue today. So imagine how much harder it is for a child who has been labeled as learning disabled or emotionally disturbed. Imagine how much harder it is for them later on down the line. And so I think that, you can go to the next slide. I think that, that is a good transition into my last point or my last pitch here. I did bring African Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order, this brain book over here. If you are an educator or a parent or concerned with the consciousness or and education of Black children, it is a must read. Okay. I was able to actually had an opportunity to speak with the publisher of the book, who was best friends with Amos Wilson, and he indicated that if there was any book that parents and educators need to read, it's this one. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. I am inviting you all to sign up for a little book discussion that I have revolving around this book. Of course, it is a Zoom course. I'm inviting you all to join that because as an educator or as a future educator, it's really important if you are, especially if you're, on the way to getting in a classroom full of Black children. I think it's important for you to reframe, even if you are in the mainstream classroom or a special education classroom. I think that it's important for you to reframe your thoughts about what you're doing in front of them. And so there are little things that we can do as educators in a foreign system or in a foreign kind of land, what we can do to make sure that we empower our children. So that is it. I do want to stress a lot about Amos Wilson, boy. All right, but there are other educators and psychologists, African-centered, who have written wonderful books about what's going on in the classroom, how it affects us, and special education in general. So I do want you to, if you have a chance, take a picture of this slide here and kind of dig into some of these folks' work. I will say that Asa Hilliard wrote a great book about the testing of Black children and how. Well, I'm not going for you, but pick that up. I'm not sure, maybe they have it here, but they definitely have this book here. So a little plug for the bookstore. They do have that. But you can go to the next one. I do want to thank you for joining me today, and I'm here for any questions if you have any. questions? Any particular questions? Okay, so, I was Howard, okay. I got my master's at Howard, okay. Undergrad, I went to Clark Atlanta. I started at Hampton, but I transferred to Clark Atlanta, so,
You made a better choice.
yes.
Is this video going to be available? Where is it going to be available? On YouTube? Sankofa?
Sankofa video and books on YouTube under our live.
And if you are interested in contacting me for whatever reason, like if you have, because I know most of you are students, so if you have any particular questions, specific questions, or if you want to kind of pick my brain or, anything, feel free to go to regeneration180.org. There's like a contact me link there, and, just get in touch. Or you can reach out at Jennifer, spelled the European way, JENNINBR, at regeneration180.org. So if you want to, get in touch.
So y'all are looking for schools talking about we currently in public schools. And what I face every year is, because I have read the lots of books and stuff, I'm kind of ready for the teachers. And one thing I hear them saying often is he is very, he's always up and about, right? And so, in reading the books that I've read, I'm realizing that they don't try to accommodate the child, they want the child to accommodate the system,
Right.
so to speak, and punish, especially our boys, for their being so active. So, what can you, and we can talk further after this, but what would you recommend in dealing with teachers who don't understand boys, and specifically black boys' nature, and don't punish them? That's like they punish our boys for being who they are.
Yeah. So usually what happens is that there are district-wide trainings on specific topics. I think that this particular topic that you're talking about, with black boys and their nature, their natural state, it's kind of been now looked over. I feel like that they've decided that, okay, we're done with that. We've kind of worked with that enough, because you really don't see trainings for people. They feel, I would assume central office and the district, they feel that you got that training when you were in school, so you should know how to deal with a black boy, or deal with these types of behaviors. What I would say is that we need to go back to those types of district-wide trainings, which they aren't necessarily doing. But I consult with teachers actually as well. So, if there is a situation where you can get with the school and have them contact me to do a training, I would love to do that, to emphasize that, the nature of a boy, period, but, black boys in particular, is to be active, okay? We want men to be active. It's so, this whole subservient kind of behavior that we are trying to impose on them really does damage for them in their manhood, I will say that. And especially our black boys who turn into black men, we don't want them to adjust their behavior for childhood, and then we think that they can, just take on the world, in 20, 30 years. That's not how it works. So, get in touch with me. And if the school is interested in having me in, I would love to do a training for teachers in that type of capacity. So.
Yeah, I can present that to them. I'm sorry, I just want to throw this in there. I am also in the middle of reading The Purpose of Boys. The author is actually not black, he's Jewish, but he did try to have like a couple of chapters on African American boys and what plagued them and stuff. And I presented that to the school. They looked at me like I had 4 years. And why I think they looked at me like that is because they're trying to make everything non-binary. So that's how they're able to
Very
get around
diverse.
that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they're like, oh, don't separate the boys and the girls when boys have completely different natures.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's the problem that I'm noticing I'm facing with that, but I will have them contact them.
Thank you. Yeah, that continues to be, I'm all for diversity and all of that, but there are certain needs that non-white children need in schools. We can't act like it's not a reality because we are not the same. We don't have the same experiences. We don't have the same worldviews. So it's important to actually be conscious of those facts instead of pretending like we are the world and this is just a melting pot. In a way we can get to that point, but everybody needs what they need, and so we can't just take away from that fact.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you teach Orisha philosophy to children, and if so, how do you do that?
Do I teach what?
Orisha philosophy, because I know you say you're a priest.
Yeah. I have written a curriculum on that. A lot of my curriculum are still kind of in the works. One of the beautiful things about having a community school and doing action research is that each year I can kind of figure out, okay, is this working, and then kind of revise it. So yes, I do teach Orisha philosophy. I also teach Kemetic philosophy as well. So I start with Kemetic and then I, link that to Orisha because it's much easier as an educator for me to kind of start from Kemet. But yes, the answer is yes. And I also do online classes for homeschoolers. So if you're interested in contacting me or something like that,
Let them know.
Yes, just reach out. Yes.
How do we follow your work? And you said you have curriculums. How do we get access to your curriculums?
I am in the process of writing a book. Okay. More information about how to access my curriculum will be talked about in that book. However, most of my curriculum is designed for children who attend an NCAS school, the National Calabash and Higgins studies. Like I said, I revise, we're in the beginning processes. I just started, working working on them since 2019. It seems like a long time ago, but it really wasn't to me. But contact me and, I can share it. I have a master's. I have an incomplete doctorate, so I don't use doctor. The dissertation is not doctor, so I don't use it. But yes, but I do have doctoral training. Any other questions? All right. Okay. Well,
I have a question.
Oh.
I might have missed it, but how did you get involved with African Center education versus just any other, stream of education?
Good question. Okay, so back at Howard, I graduated in 2003. So back at Howard, in the school psychology program, and I don't know if things have changed now, so don't be running over there to let them know. But back then, there was only one class that I took that I think was available that was specific to the needs of Black children, and it was called Seminar of Black Child Development. Okay, that course changed my life. That's when I learned about Amos Wilson. I have to be honest, before then I did not know who he was. I recognized his face, but I didn't know who he was, And so that class was when I decided that what I do will benefit African American children. So I started to study African-centered psychologists and educators, getting their points of view while still maintaining the program. And then when I got out of the program, I did go to the school system, but my mind had already been set, is that number one, I wanted to start a school for Black children, and number two, well, that was it, that I wanted to start a school for Black children. So I would say it was like maybe 2002 where the light bulb came on, and I was like, okay, what I do when I leave here will impact someone greatly. I did participate in it for a long time, not being specific in African-centered education, but I think that the knowledge that I got from working for DCPS and the different private schools that I worked for in Maryland, that kind of gave me the actual practice of, okay, wait a minute, and the observations of what is exactly going on in these schools. So I don't regret, working for the system for so long, but in 2017, I had all my children at that point, and I was like, I'm not letting them participate in this. So that was kind of the kick, kick my butt, through the door, and to, focus on what it is that I know that I'm placed here to do. So.
Are you homeschooling your children?
I am. I'm homeschooling them, but also community schooling. So, yeah, my children are homeschoolers on paper, but we do have a community school. So, even though this particular semester we're not community schooling, my parents, because we have the flexibility that we are homeschoolers, we will be getting back together in February. But that's strategic, though. So the way that I'm doing this schooling or creating the school system is very strategic in that, number one, it kind of pulls the red tape. I am not, as a homeschooler or a community schooler, I'm not necessarily restricted to, this is what you have to teach, you have to do this, you have to do that. I have free range to do what I want to do with my children. And I think that's important for any homeschooler, Black, white, or other. It gives us the flexibility. So yes, I'm a homeschooler. I have a 12-year-old and two 10-year-olds, twins. And so we've been at it since the twins, they did 1 year of kindergarten at their local school, and then that was it. We've been doing it ever since. So yes, I think it's important. Homeschooling is very important. But I do think that that's just a first step, though, because homeschooling, you're still individualizing. It's important for Black children, but in particular, to be able to learn together so that they can learn how to work together. A lot of what I see as great education is, number one, character building, but also the relationship building between African people. We have serious problems in terms of how we relate to each other. So that's a big key point in how we educate. Yes.
How do you insert the socialization piece that you're discussing right now in your community school?
So we do a lot of group learning, but then we also do, group learning is very important, okay? That is across the board, whether you're 6 in the community school or 10. We do a lot of group learning. But then we also do self-directed learning. So we have something that's kind of like a personalized plan where our children will learn what they want to learn. So at the beginning of the school year, they determine or they identify, okay, I want to learn about this, I want to learn about that, I want to learn about this type of industry, or what is it like to be a zoologist? And they will focus on those things. So we have plenty of time for our children to work on what they want to learn, what we want them to learn, and also learning together. And so, yes, that socialization piece is very important because, number one, being separated from other children as a homeschooler is kind of already a disadvantage already. But, when you are working with other people who are homeschoolers, number one, it lets you know that, okay, I'm not a weirdo. Because I think there's some stigmas that we have to get over with the homeschooling. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question. I'm just rambling on. But, yeah. Any other questions?
Just how do I get your contact information?
I'll share it with you before you leave. Yes.
Thank you everyone for coming and give it up for Jennifer. Jennifer.
Oh.
And
One more thing, if you want to learn about any of the programs that I talked about, or if you want to support our mission, just scan the little scanny thing. What is that? Oh yeah, QR code.
yeah.
QR code. So, so thank you so much.
Thank you. And that Amos Wilson title is on our website, but we have more Amos Wilson titles up in the front if you guys want to check out Amos Wilson.